2751 A mousetrap for the demigod. Sunny, I think I walked into a trap. Sunny froze when Cassie's voice suddenly resounded in his mind. It sounded calm, but concerned, a dire proof that whatever danger Cassie had found herself in was grave enough to make her fear for her safety. It had to be, otherwise, she would not have contacted him at all. His mind spun, entertaining innumerable possibilities. The most probable reason was that the thralls locked up in the quarantine facility in NQSC had escaped their cells. Possibly Astarion was finally making a move. It was unlikely that a group of enthralled awakened could pose a threat to a saint, but possibly the supreme pulling on the strings behind the scenes had empowered them, somehow. No, wait, was Cassie even in the abandoned factory at the moment? She had been spending most of her time there, but today, she was supposed to meet with Wake of Ruin. Sunny thought that it was today, at least. His mind settled as he prepared to take action. Where are you? The answer came a split second later. NQS. But she never finished the sentence. Her voice disappeared abruptly, a dead silence filling his mind in its place. Sunny remained still for a moment. Cassie. There was no response. At this point, his composure finally revealed a crack. Damn it all. Sunny assessed the situation. Cassie was somewhere in NQSC, facing danger, possibly mortal danger. Unless it was already too late, and she was. Unwilling to finish the thought, he shifted slightly. In any case, there was no point in considering that possibility, since there was nothing he could do if it was already too late. If it wasn't, however, he had to act fast and base his decisions on the assumption that Cassie was still alive. He had to travel to NQSC and find her as quickly as possible. Sunny's thoughts moved at a speed far greater than that of a mundane human, so no more than a single heartbeat had passed since Cassie sent him the message. His incarnations were scattered across the dream realm. Ravenheart, Bastion, Godgrave, and the Forgotten Shore, each one was performing an important task, but nothing was as important as ensuring Cassie's safety. The question was, which one would he send? Just as he began considering the question, his eyes widened slightly. That was because several things happened at the same time all across the dream realm. In the Forgotten Shore, he sensed the shadows moving erratically beyond the walls of the dark castle, in the prison camp. There, a storm of ethereal sparks suddenly exploded to obscure the somber buildings, beginning to coalesce into hundreds of monstrous echoes. In Ravenheart, the ground trembled as a deafening groan of shattering rock resounded from the depths of the volcano. A jagged crack suddenly appeared on its slope, sending enormous boulders rolling downward and threatening to drown the outer reaches of the city in lava. In Bastion, bells suddenly rang in the towers of the ancient castle, announcing that a powerful nightmare creature had entered the estuary of the Mirror River and was now moving upstream, threatening to attack Rivergate. And those were merely the places Sunny was watching over from the shadows. Even if he did not have any proof at the moment, he was convinced that similar situations were happening in other areas of the dream realm, and Earth too, possibly. He frowned. What terrifying timing. Too terrifying to be a coincidence, no less. Sadly, that did not mean that they could ignore these acts of sabotage. Eradicating the echoes summoned by the thralls among the captives was simple enough. Revel could handle them herself, but if he wanted to avoid any casualties, he would have to lend her his help and guidance. The unknown threat to Rivergate was serious enough for the Watchmen to raise the alarm, but Effie would most likely be able to handle it alone. Still, considering that Astarion seemed to be behind the attack, there was a real possibility that it was a trap, so Sunny would have to go take a look personally to ensure a good outcome. A trap. The situation in Ravenheart was similar. Kai had long been prepared to deal with anything the volcano could throw at him, and he had plenty of helpers on top of that. Morgan alone could probably stop the lava from reaching the city. However, Sunny was still going to watch over them, in case there was more to the sudden earthquake than it seemed. All of these emergencies were quite easy to handle. Which meant that, it's a trap. What other reason would Astarion have to deliver such trifling attacks to the human domain? Either he was trying to distract them from something, or it was a carefully set trap. Cassie needs my help. A good trap was incomplete without a perfect lure, though. Sunny and Neffys were not going to let their cities suffer. But nothing would lure them out better than a threat to their closest friend and confidant's life, out there in the waking world, no less, where their powers would be suppressed. Sunny was suddenly sure of it. The Dreamspawn had prepared a trap for them, and Cassie was the lure. It seems he has a very low opinion of our intelligence. Naturally, Sunny had to rescue Cassie. But he was not going to walk into a trap unprepared. At the very least, he had to inform Nefis of the danger and take her with him. Effie and Kai would be tied up dealing with the emergencies, Jet as well, most likely, but there were still a few powerful transcendent allies he could call upon to act in the waking world without being suppressed by its laws. So, Sunny would have to collect them before venturing across the realm boundary. A simple plan swiftly formed in his mind, and he nodded resolutely. His incarnations were already preparing to depart in order to enact the plan when Sunny stopped himself and frowned. Something was bothering him. Something. It felt like he was overlooking some small detail. A small detail, but important nonetheless. But what was it? His frown deepened. Cassie needs my help. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he realized something. It was the frightening fact that ever since Cassie had contacted him with a plea for help, his thoughts had been a little strange. His thoughts had been a little suspect. They were not irrational, really, but his priorities seemed oddly skewed. He had surrendered the urgency of the situation in favor of caution too easily, at the very least. What the hell was I thinking about, wanting to waste time gathering helpers when Cassie might be hurt or dying right now? Sunny's eyes widened, and he inspected himself carefully. It was only then that he realized that his thoughts and emotions were being manipulated by someone. The realization hit him like a bucket of cold water. Sunny possessed very formidable mental defenses, and it was only because of that powerful resistance that he had been able to notice the unnatural course of his thoughts. If he hadn't, he would have continued to act on the circumspect plan, oblivious to the insidious mental assault. Which of his other thoughts and emotions were not his own, then? A piercing, unpleasant feeling grasped his heart. There was no time to examine his every thought and feeling, though. He had already wasted too much of it. Muttering a quiet curse, Sunny rose from his throne and pulled on his tether. The realm boundary offered too much resistance to his vast existence, though, so he gritted his teeth and roughly forced his way into the waking world. Appearing on the deserted streets of the outskirts in a violent whirlwind, he inhaled deeply, and then extended his shadow sense to cover all of NQSC. Immediately, billions of shadows flooded his mind, hundreds of millions of them belonging to living beings. A vast expanse of tangled streets, numerous buildings extending both high into the sky and deep into the ground, a myriad of moving humans, the gaping holes in the fabric of the world where the active Nightmare Gate stood, surrounded by alloy fences and contamination domes. He had to find a single individual among them. Even with Sunny's capabilities, it took him a little time to locate Cassie. And when he did, his blood ran cold. Letting out a growl, Sunny stepped into the shadows and emerged from them on a quiet, peaceful street, or at least it had been peaceful, once. Now, one of the homes here seemed to be on the verge of collapsing, and blood was smeared on the smooth surface of the concrete pavement. Cassie was here, maimed and bleeding, but still alive. And behind her, just as Sunny focused his attention there, a gargantuan dream gate suddenly tore the fabric of reality apart in the middle of NQSC. 2752 echoing absence. It only took Sunny a split second to register every minute detail of his surroundings. The world was drowning in the soft embrace of the night, shrouded by encroaching darkness. The warmth of the dying summer had already surrendered to the cool indifference of the fall. The stars were nearly invisible, having retreated from the stark radiance of electric lights. A silver moon was climbing the velvet expanse of the dark sky. The lamps that were supposed to illuminate the desolate street had all been extinguished, but it was bathed in moonlight. The residences here were small and clinging to each other with no space between, a far cry from the spacious homes in more affluent districts, but still a step above standard family units in residential towers. They were the kind of homes that families of modest standing could sometimes afford if they lived diligently and budgeted their incomes wisely. One of these cozy homes was a ruin now, revealing its decimated interior through a shattered wall. A red trail led from it to the middle of the road, where Cassie was laying motionlessly, awash in blood. She was still breathing, and her shadow was still that of a living being, but, for some reason, her wounds were not healing, as if Nefis could not reach her with the soothing blessing of her flames. A middle-aged woman with blonde hair and a lovely kind of beauty that felt familiar enough to draw a connection was kneeling in the puddle of blood near her, a strangely blissful smile playing on her lips. And behind them, Sunny let out a quiet hiss. A towering dream gate had just sliced the fabric of the black sky like a razor-sharp blade, biting into the surface of the road and hungrily drinking in the moonlight. Inside it, a darkness far more terrifying than the night hid like a predator. That hungry abyss felt both boundless and insatiable, enough so that, for a moment, Sunny could not tell if he was looking at a nightmare gate instead. A tall man with tan skin and black hair was standing in front of the gate. For a moment, he cast a gaze of his glistening golden eyes at Sunny and smiled slightly. Then, with a small bow, he took a step back and disappeared into the gate. It happened so fast that Sunny could not do anything, leaving him to seethe with a dark, murderous fury. His killing intent was so overwhelming that the grass around him withered, and the trees lost their yellowing leaves. At that moment, he knew that the man with golden eyes was none other than Astarion, the Dreamspawn, in the flesh. That bastard had escaped the moon, after all. Sunny stared at the abyssal dream gate for a moment, then slowly tore his gaze away and looked at Cassie. So many things were happening at the same time, but this one was the most important. Taking one step, he appeared near her unconscious form and kneeled. Reaching forward, Sunny carefully turned her over and assessed her wounds. His breath caught for a moment. Cassie's body was bloodied and battered, littered with cuts and lacerations. These wounds alone were not enough to kill a saint, but what shocked him was how terribly she was maimed, with one eye missing and the entire left side of her face covered in blood. A painful mix of fury and powerlessness grasped his heart. There's no time for that. There was no time for sentiment, indeed. Astarion had just revealed himself, and on top of that, he opened a dream gate in the middle of NQSC. That alone was enough to inform humanity that there was an unknown supreme out there somewhere, but Sunny already knew that it was only half of the problem. The Dreamspawn could have retreated to anywhere in the dream realm, making the task of finding him again all but impossible. And yet, Sunny already knew exactly where he had gone. This is not good at all. Just a minute before, his incarnation in Bastion was following Nephis as she commanded the Fire Keepers to take the chain breaker to Rivergate. The flying ship rose from the placid lake of the Ivory Island and plummeted toward the castle, where Effie was already donning her armor and retrieving her spear. Should one of us go with her? Sunny sounded uncharacteristically unsure of himself. That was because even while one of his incarnations was searching NQSC for Cassie's familiar shadow, he was questioning his every thought and decision. Who knew which ones had already been tampered with by Astarion? Nephis gave him a short look. Effie is more than capable enough to handle that threat. Don't overthink it. The Dreamspawn did mess with our minds, but he is not powerful enough to enthrall a Supreme Titan. Now that we know what to look out for, further manipulation would be difficult. Sunny grimaced. Difficult did not mean impossible. The madness of Connacht had failed to consume Neff's mind, and Astarion was probably not going to succeed either. Granted, his power seemed to be subtler and more insidious, more akin to Nightmare's dream curse than anything, accumulating slowly as it poisoned its victims. Sunny and Nephis both knew his name, which meant that they were already carriers of the idea of Astarion. However, that did not mean that he could control them. At best, he could attempt a subtle manipulation or compel them to say his name aloud without noticing it. Astarion had already tried to launch a full-scale mental assault on both Nephis and Sunny, and all that bought him was a few dozen seconds of disorientation. The nature of his powers also meant that such an attack would be less effective the second time around, hopefully, so there was no reason to worry too much about this facet of the threat posed by the Dreamspawn, at least. What is the situation? Without Cassie, their fastest means of receiving important information was gone. The familiar means of communicating with the members of the cohort were gone, as well. There were alternatives, of course, but none were as swift or efficient. It was no surprise that Sunny and Nephis had grown dependent on the quiet and unassuming blind seer. In her echoing absence, Sunny's 7 incarnations scattered across the world were the closest there was to a replacement. As Nephis walked toward the balcony, summoning her armor and the blessing, he followed with a hard expression. I am dealing with the echoes in the prison camp as we speak. That one is easy enough. Morgan had blocked the crack in the slope of the volcano, and Kai is directing the consequent measures. There would be no damage done to Ravenheart. We will have to hear more about the minor attacks in other areas, but for now, everything seems to be under control. Nephis's brow creased slightly. What about Cassie? Sunny lingered for a moment. Cassie. He narrowed his eyes, then let out a relieved sigh. Found her. She's wounded, but alive. The man who attacked her. Sunny did not get the chance to finish the sentence, though. Because just then, Astarion had opened his dream gate. Its entrance opened on a desolate street in NQSC. While its exit, as Nephis stepped out onto the balcony of the Ivory Tower, she could see the exit perfectly well. Astarion's dream gate was there, below them. Towering above the mirror lake in the heart of Bastion. 2753 The Road to Hell. Unlike NQSC, which was already in the embrace of a dark night, Bastion was still basking in sunlight. The surface of the lake glistened placidly, reflecting the blue sky, the walls of the castle, and the stunning silhouette of the Ivory Island drifting between the clouds above it. Bastion was usually a bustling city, and today was no exception. Countless people were out and about, some working, some taking a break from their duties. For the latter, the most popular destination was the parks and promenades running along the lakeshore. Those who resided inside the castle, meanwhile, often took walks on its piers and outer walls. All of them paused in the middle of what they were doing when a cold breeze blew from the water. It was not unpleasant or strange, really, but there was something about the cool wind that made them stop and look in the direction of the lake. It was then that the water rippled, growing restless for a moment, and the spectacular rift of a dream gate split the sky above the lake. For citizens of Bastion, the sight of the Dream Gate was nothing new. Most of them had entered the dream realm through the gate opened by the King of Swords. After all, their memories of it were hazy, though, since they were under tremendous stress while escaping the chain of nightmares. But they saw Changing Star's Dream Gate almost every day, and many even took trips to admire the view of its radiant depths from close by. The Dream Gate that opened on the surface of the Mirror Lake now, however, was nothing like that luminous portal. It was dark and eerie instead, and those who looked into its depths shuddered because it felt like the gate was looking back. A moment later, though, that eerie feeling was gone. The Dream Gate disappeared, as well, and all that remained of it was the figure of a tall, handsome man standing on the surface of the water. Inhaling the fresh air of Bastion with a full chest, he smiled softly, clasped his hands behind his back, and walked across the water with easy steps. The man was walking toward the castle. The clouds reflected on the water he treaded upon. Because the reflection of the castle was surrounded by the clouds, People of Bastion now called it Cloud Castle, so, it seemed as if the man was walking both on water and across the sky, like a guest from the celestial realm who had somehow gotten lost in the mortal world. His golden eyes and pleasant smile only made that impression stronger. The people who stood on the walls of the castle all looked at him, fascinated and mesmerized. Their faces betrayed expressions of curiosity, fascination, and awe. Who is that man? He came from a dream gate. Is he a supreme? Can he be the king of nothing? No, of course not. He doesn't look like that villainous monster. Do you know what the king of nothing looks like, then? Well, no, but this man is definitely not an evil man. Who is he, then? Is there another supreme? While the citizens watched Astarion cross the lake with wonder in their eyes, Sunny and Neffys were having an entirely different reaction. They were stunned for a short moment. The dream spawn was supposed to be sealed on the moon. After all, they had taken the possibility of his escape into account, but neither expected that Astarion would one day just show up in the middle of Bastion, completely in the open, instead of biding his time and hiding somewhere in the dream realm. He's here. Neff's voice was even. Sunny studied her face quietly for a moment. Cassie is in rough shape. She'll live, but your flames do not seem to be working. Neffys lowered her gaze. Quote. I know. Sunny could not help but stare at the distant figure of Astarion. The implications of his coming to Bastion were too difficult to predict, at this point, but all of it was bad. In fact, it was all worse than bad. On the other hand, the adversary was finally here, right in front of them, and while he could not be killed, it was possible to defeat and contain him. It was just that they still knew too little about the Dreamspawn. They did not even know what his purpose was, let alone what aces he was hiding in his sleeves. Sunny frowned. So, do we just attack him? Neffys stared at the Dreamspawn for a moment, her eyes burning with a cold, scathing hatred. However, in the end, she slowly shook her head and dismissed the blessing. No, if we fight here, all of Bastion might be wiped off the map. Sunny grimaced. He was aware of the fact, as well. It was just that. Even if he would never sacrifice Bastion and all its people, he had an ominous feeling that they would one day regret not stopping Astarion right here and now. It was an appalling feeling, to know that you would regret something and still have no choice but to do it anyway. So what do we do? Neffys exhaled slowly, then stepped onto the parapet of the balcony. For now, I guess we'll have to talk to him. Down below, Astarion had reached the middle of the lake. There, he stopped and looked at the people gathered on the walls of the castle with a smile. The Mirror Lake was vast, so there was no way for his voice to reach them. But, somehow, it did. In fact, it could be heard both from the walls of the castle and from the lakeshore, where a far greater crowd was gathered, looking at him with wonder. The Dreamspawn said, "Citizens of Bastion, people of the human domain. My name is Astarion, and once upon a time, I fought against the nightmare spell by Broken Sword's side. My dear friend is gone now, and I have become supreme. He glanced up at the graceful silhouette of the Ivory Island, at Nephis. Then, Astarion looked back at the people, and his smile widened. I am here to help. 2754 A new supreme. Astarion regarded the citizens of Bastion with a benevolent smile and fell silent. His bold proclamation had caused a great shock among the people, who were only now learning about the existence of another supreme. As they discussed the stunning news excitedly, he lingered for a moment and then looked up. Up there, above the Mirror Lake, the chains of the Ivory Island rattled as it began to descend. The people noticed that the Celestial Island was moving soon. Their excited voices fell silent, and they watched breathlessly as it glided down from the sky. Eventually, the flying citadel landed on the water and plunged into it, raising a wave as it became no different from a mundane island. The ivory tower now stood between Astarion and the castle, as if shielding one from the other, or perhaps welcoming him to the human domain. That was how the people saw it, at least, since Changing Star had never brought her heavenly court down to the ground before. Astarion remained standing on the turbulent surface of the lake with a calm expression, observing the Tower of Hope curiously. Then, his gaze traveled to the shore of the island, where a woman of sublime and holy radiance was standing at the edge of the water, her silver hair moving faintly in the wind. Nephis and Astarion regarded each other silently for a while. Then, she willed the water to support her weight and stepped off the emerald grass, walking across the lake to meet him. The people held their breaths, watching their goddess and the golden-eyed supreme meet. Nephis stopped a few meters away from Astarion, regarding him coldly. He studied her for a few moments, as well, then glanced briefly at her shadow. Then, he cast an amused gaze at her reflection on the surface of the lake. Finally, Astarion looked up and smiled warmly. My dear Nephis, how well you have grown up. She did not answer, continuing to watch him with an expressionless face. He chuckled. It warms my heart to see that even if my friends are gone, their daughter is alive and well. You took up the torch that had fallen from their cold hands and raised the banner of immortal flame high, higher than ever before, shining a radiant light to guide humanity through the darkness. They say that humanity will not be extinguished as long as immortal flame still burns, after all. His golden eyes suddenly glinted with amusement. As long as the last daughter of immortal flame still stands unbroken. The people on the walls of the castle and on the shores of the lake exploded with cheers. For Sunny and Nephis, though, that last remark carried quite a sinister undertone. Nephis lowered her chin a little. She was most likely searching for a way out of the appalling situation they had found themselves in, and discovering none. Sunny knew because he could not find a solution, either. Astarion had them exactly where he wanted them. He had no hope of defeating them in battle, so he took the population of Bastion hostage to prevent them from attacking him, just like he had taken the lives of people infected by the knowledge of his name hostage to stop them from preventing its propagation. Not only could they not engage Astarion in battle despite finally confronting him face to face, but they could not even stop him from announcing his name to the entirety of Bastion. Modern Bastion was an enormous city. By the end of the day, every human living here would be exposed to Astarion's name, and it would not stop there. Merchants would carry it to other cities in the east, while ships would bring it to the Stormzia. From there, it would enter the basin of the River of Tears and travel north to Ravenhard. It would also travel by the Road of Shadows to traverse Gaugrave in the north. But even that was not the worst part. There were countless awakened in Bastion, and while some of them had come here through a dream gate, others were still traveling to the dream realm from the waking world every night. Once these people returned to Earth, Astarion's name would become unstoppable. No matter how tightly the government controlled the network, even the mighty propaganda machine could not suppress news as explosive as the emergence of a new supreme. Soon enough, every human in existence would know the name of Astarion. Despite how much effort Sunny and Nephis had put into containing it, it had all been for naught. It had all been useless. And the most disturbing part of it all was that they had never even stood a chance. No matter how much Sunny thought about it, he could not imagine how they could have prevented this disaster. Short of obliterating all of Bastion, that was. He felt it again, then, the ghastly feeling of powerlessness. He got us good. Of course, the war was not lost yet. With the number of infected people increasing exponentially, the number of exposed people who were especially susceptible to the disease would increase, as well. Far more of them would end up enthralled. Cassie had already been barely handling their numbers, so even if she recovered from her wounds, the quarantine facility in NQSC would prove woefully insufficient. Therefore, they would have to invent more drastic measures of removing the thralls from the board. In this situation, the resistance of the population to the plague of Astarion would become even more important. Which meant that Sunny and Nephis would have to do anything in their power to make sure that belief in the human domain remained as strong as ever, while Astarion would, without a doubt, attempt to undermine it. As Nephis and Astarion looked at each other, one expressionless, the other smiling warmly, they both were probably thinking about just that. It was why Nephis had not allowed herself to express her hatred, knowing that he would turn any display of hostility against her. Astarion raised an eyebrow. "Are you not going to welcome me home, dear Nephis? I've been away for so long." Met with silence, he chuckled and shook his head. "Then again, you were shy even as a little girl. There's nothing wrong with being a little emotional when reuniting with someone precious, though, that's just human nature." With that, he took a step forward and walked the remaining distance separating them. Stopping a hair's breadth away from Nephis, Astarion looked down at her and slowly raised his arms. Then, as countless people watched, he reached forward and pulled her into a tight embrace. Lowering his head to her ear, he whispered, "Of course, we've never been humans to begin with, Yuen." "Right, Nephis." 2755 honeyed words. "Remove your hands unless you want to lose them. I might not be able to kill you, parasite, but I can make you wish that you were dead." Neph's voice was even and quiet, so no one except her and Astarion could hear it, well, and Sunny, of course, who was hiding in her shadow. It was so emotionless as to sound inhuman, but the cold threat contained within it was only more palpable as a result. Astarion broke his embrace and took a step back. When he spoke again, his words did not resonate across the lake, leaving the people watching them with rapt attention from afar none the wiser as to what was being said. "How time flies. You really are all grown up, sweet Nephis." He gave her an evaluating look. "I've endured plenty of pain, you know. What makes you think that you'll be able to hurt me more than any of the countless ghastly beings that I've met?" She pierced him with an impassive look. "Have you ever met a being who could reduce you to a shrieking pile of charred flesh, then heal you, then burn you to ash all over again? Until you lose even the ability to curse the day you became immortal and forget how to beg for mercy." Astarion regarded her silently for a few moments, then glanced away with a faint smile. "Ah, still so sweet, I see." Ignoring his nonchalant tone, Nephis allowed her brow to crease slightly and asked in a cold tone. "What do you want?" He gave her an amused glance. "Are you really not going to invite me inside? I don't mind, really. If anything, talking in front of all these people works better for me." Nephis inhaled deeply, then turned and invited him into the ivory tower with a gesture. Astarion walked past her and headed for the great pagoda, looking around the island. In the distance, the people exploded with another wave of cheers. The Dreamspawn, meanwhile, studied the bones of Dragon Savirax, the Ivory Lord, with curiosity. Choosing not to say anything, he passed through the dragon's maw and entered the ivory tower. The firekeepers stationed on the island had left, taking the chain breaker with them, so it was just the three of them inside the great pagoda at the moment. As soon as they were hidden from the gazes of the crowd, Sunny rose silently from the shadows and regarded the Dreamspawn with murder in his eyes. Astarion met his gaze calmly. "The Lord of Shadows. Sunless, was it? This is our first proper meeting, I think. My name is Astarion." "Ah, but you already knew that." It took all of Sunny's composure not to move. One of his incarnations was carrying Cassie across the realm boundary at that moment, his clothes soaked with her blood, so, he was in the mood to mangle and maim, not hold polite conversations. Still, he held himself back. Astarion looked around the great hall of the ivory tower, his gaze lingering on the chains forming the gateway ring on the floor. Eventually, he let out a wistful sigh. "You've achieved so much, Nephis." He gave her a look that seemed almost proud. "No, truly, you gave me quite a start. I did expect you to mock your parents proud, but I never imagined that you would attain supremacy and conquer the world. You brought down two supremes." Astarion looked at Sunny, "and seduced the third. How very devious of you." "Well done." Nephis gritted her teeth. "I will repeat myself. What do you want?" He looked at her with a surprised expression. "Didn't I say, I want to help?" At that point, Sunny could not help but scoff. "Please, don't make me laugh." Astarion sighed and strolled around the gateway, studying the magnificent interior of the brightly illuminated hall. "I felt it already, but the two of you seem to harbor a deep animosity toward me." I've never done anything to deserve such hostility, so I truly cannot help but be perplexed. Why do you treat me as an enemy? White flames ignited in the depths of Nef's eyes. You dare ask? I could not help but notice how you dared to utter the name of my father with that dirty mouth of yours, as well. My father, whom you killed. Astarion stopped and turned to face her, a concerned expression settling on his handsome face. He let out a sigh. Indeed, I did. However, you should know by now why Broken Sword had to be killed. Do you think that I felt joy while watching my Chloe Street friend die? On the contrary, it felt as if my own heart was being pierced. But it had to be done, and so, we did it. To prevent the Forgotten God from awakening. Nephis looked at him with scathing hatred. Sunny smiled darkly. Oh, I see. You were the good guy all along. Why were Anvil and Kisong terrified of you, then? Why did they trap you on the moon? Astarion gave him a confused glance. Eventually, he said as if explaining something self-evident. Isn't it only natural for villains to fear a good man? I don't see a reason why I, the victim of their treachery, should be condemned for it. Not to mention that Nephis is only alive because I prevented them from coming after her in full force. Who knows? That might have been why they turned against me, in the end. Nephis chuckled. How admirable. A good man, though. How shameless are you? Would a good man put a mind hex on numerous people, turning them into obedient thralls? Astarion smiled wryly. And after turning them into obedient thralls, I commanded them to do, what, exactly? Continue with their lives as if nothing was the matter, doing their best to contribute to society. How dreadful. I must truly be a monster. He shook his head. Let us be honest, Nephis. Those people might have fallen under my power, but I've never done anything to abuse that power or harm them. If anything, you two are the ones doing them harm. And besides, he looked at her with a faint smile. Haven't you done exactly the same? Haven't you lied, manipulated people, and twisted the TGUTH to win their loyalty? From the Forgotten Shore to Godgrave, you did everything you could to enthrall and subjugate those around you. That was how you conquered humanity. Ah, but don't get me wrong. I am not judging you. If anything, I am impressed. It was beautifully done, really. And from such a weak position, no less. Astarion raised his hands and clapped a few times, seemingly enjoying himself. Can you rightfully admonish me, though? His pleasant voice sounded a little reproachful. 2756 most insidious of foes. Sunny stared at Astarion, not knowing how to react. Was he mocking them? Nephis, meanwhile, frowned deeply. That is not the same. Astarion chuckled. Why? Because I use my aspect, while you used underhanded schemes and the propaganda machine of the government. I am sorry, but I will have to disagree. To an ordinary person, those two are equally impossible to overcome. The soft power you wield is in no way inferior to the mystical powers I command. It can even make people die for you, and countless did die, with a happy smile on their faces. Ah, how eerie. Sunny had had enough of this unabashed nonsense. Taking a step forward, he spat through gritted teeth. What kind of crap are you trying to pull? Do you think that spouting lies in a confident tone magically makes them true? You've never done anything to abuse your power or cause your thralls harm. Please, your thralls are staging a suicidal attempt to escape their prison. At the same time, Ravenheart is at risk of being drowned in lava. At the same time, nightmare creatures are storming Rivergate. All of it is your doing. Astarion blinked a few times, looking at him with a confused expression. You kidnapped all those people and put them into a harrowing prison. Naturally, they would want to escape. They don't need me to manipulate them into trying to regain their freedom. People value freedom above all else, after all. As for erupting volcanoes and attacking nightmare creatures, it feels like you're just looking for random things to blame on me now. What do I have to do with these unfortunate events? Sunny felt like he was going insane. Astarion was clearly lying. They knew that he was lying, and he knew that they knew that he was lying, and yet, he continued to lie with a sincere expression and an utter lack of shame. You caused these unfortunate events, bastard. Astarion simply gave him a look of incomprehension. Nephis let out a heavy sigh. I guess you did not attack Cassie, either. He turned to her and studied her expression intently for a few moments. Then, Astarion shook his head. No, I did attack your friend, Song of the Fallen. I had to. His golden eyes seemed to lose their mesmerizing gleam, turning a shade darker. I had to take her power away, in order to protect you. After all, I am here to help. Sunny suddenly felt tired. What the hell are you talking about, you lunatic? Astarion remained silent for a while, studying them quietly. In the end, he inhaled deeply and sighed. The two of you seem dreadfully wary of my aspect. Well, it's only fair, commendable, even. Those who are capable of manipulating the mind are the most insidious of foes, after all. I have faced persecution because of the nature of my powers my entire life. He turned away with a somber expression and looked at the chains that had once bound Hope. And yet, you are strangely trusting of your supposed friend, Song of the Fallen, who possesses the power to manipulate and alter memories. You do not seem to ever ask yourselves if that power had been turned against you, which is a bit strange, don't you think? For two people as cautious as you. Taking a step forward, he shook his head again. It is not just strange, it is outright startling, if we consider the fact that Nephis and all those who entered the third nightmare with Song of the Fallen are suffering from unexplainable gaps in their memories, with entire swaths of their lives missing, as if intentionally erased. He turned and looked at Nephis. Those gaps in your memory, they start from your days on the Forgotten Shore, don't they? From the time you met the woman named Cassia for the first time. As Nephis stared at him with a concerned expression, he sighed. So how is that you never questioned a woman who can erase and alter memories despite missing countless memories of your own? How is it that you allowed her to become your closest aide and confidant without ever questioning her loyalty? Is it because you trust her implicitly, or is it because your real memories of her were replaced with memories of her earning your implicit trust? Astarion smiled wistfully. How many of your memories do you think might have been falsified by her? Song of the Fallen's power is too insidious. It's too dangerous. That is why I had to take that power away. Sunny stared at him with wide eyes. Hell, the bastard was the one who was too dangerous and insidious. The lies he wove were a little too convincing. If Sunny was not the cause of Neff's missing memories while retaining the knowledge of what had happened himself, even he would have been tempted to believe what Astarion was saying, and grow suspicious of Cassie, even if only for a moment. Nephis, however, did not remember the truth. So, she had no weapon to cut the net of lies. She stared at Astarion expressionlessly for a while. Eventually, though, she asked in a low tone, "Is this fun for you?" As the air in the great hall suddenly grew hot, the promise of an incinerating white abyss ignited in her eyes. Was I supposed to believe these pathetic lies? Astarion looked at her with an expression of sincere surprise, as if stumped by her unjust accusation. Then, however, his expression cracked, revealing a delighted grin. He laughed quietly. "Ah, perhaps. I thought they were quite entertaining. Admit it, you almost believed me, for a second." His expression turned cold. "That little oracle of yours was proving to be troublesome, so I had to take her eyes." "Ah, but I only managed to take one. What a pity, but do not worry." He flashed her a smile. "I'll rip out her other eye sooner or later." 2757 The three of us. Astarion's smile did not vanish despite the savage words he had spoken. However, it did change. The difference was both subtle and chilling. It was as if all warmth drained from his eyes, revealing the cold, ruthless void beneath. In the stark absence of pretense, his stunning golden eyes did not seem human at all. Then, finally, his smile disappeared as well. "Actually, I lied." With his hands still clasped behind his back, Astarion did not look too threatening. His stance was wide open, and he neither wore armor nor wielded a weapon. And yet, the sound of his voice forced Sunny to move slightly, shifting his weight to his dominant leg. Astarion walked toward Nephis slowly. "Earlier, when I said that you grew up well, Nephis, that was a lie. In truth, you are a disappointment." Stopping a few steps away, he looked at her with displeasure. "Well, I will not deny the fact that you are remarkable in your own way. In truth, I never expected you to take out Anvil and Key Song. Natural supremacy, huh, how ambitious. You gave me quite a start. To be honest, it forced me to alter some of my plans." Sunny had been meaning to explain which parts of Astarion's body he was going to slowly saw off with a dull blade if the bastard dared to touch Cassie again, but held himself back. After all, if his enemy was in the mood to ramble about his past plans, Sunny would be a fool to interrupt him. Astarion, meanwhile, sighed. "Initially, I meant to begin slowly preparing for my eventual return sometime after the Chain of Nightmares. But your antics in Godgrave made me change the timetable. You have a habit of ruining things, don't you, Nephis?" "Ah, but of course. You are changing star, after all, the star of ruin." Sunny tilted his head slightly. Interesting. If he were to believe Astarion's words, it seemed like the Dreamspawn had been planning to escape the moon for a long time. Curiously enough, these plans had been in place before the sovereigns fell, meaning that the measures they had put in place to prevent his return had not been as effective as everyone believed. It was also unnerving to see just how well informed Astarion was about everything that had happened in his absence. Even if Sunny expected no less from the Dreamspawn, why did he accelerate his plans when Nephis usurped the throne? Sunny was not sure yet, but one thing had already become painfully apparent. Astarion was somewhat fixated on Nephis, maybe because of their old connection. He did not pay the same amount of attention to the role Sunny had played in the fall of the original domains at all. My, oh my, Sunny felt something that he used to experience often, but had not had the pleasure of enjoying for quite some time, to the point that it was difficult to remember the feeling. It was the wonderful feeling of being underestimated. Astarion gave Nephis a look that was full of contempt. Still, despite your many achievements, everything about you is distasteful. Aren't you tired of maintaining the charade, pretending to be human? Or have you actually deluded yourself into believing that you are one of them? He shook his head. What a shame. Turning away, Astarion regarded the chains of hope once more. He remained silent for a few moments, then spoke, his voice echoing in the bright expanse of the great hall. There were 7 gods. There were 7 demons, as well. Plenty of terrors and titans, countless chaos creatures hiding in the void. His tone turned sharp. But there are only 3 Dreamspawns in the world. You, me, and that transcendent brat, the rest are all dead. In the wake of the chain of nightmares, meanwhile, countless children have been born in the dream realm, but none of them are like us. That is because they never belonged to both worlds. From the second of their inception, they had already belonged to the dream realm. The waking world will be gone soon, too. Do you understand what that means? Astarion's gaze grew heavy. It means that there will never be a 4th Dreamspawn. We 3 are all there is, and all there'll ever be. And since the youngest is still a child, you are the only other member of our kind to have reached adulthood. And yet, you have denied your own nature, discarding it in favor of pretense and self-deception. He smiled coldly. Do you understand my disappointment now? You have limited your own potential. You have crippled yourself, burying half of yourself in the ground. All this time, you have been fighting with one hand tied behind your back, incomplete, imbalanced, mutilated. All that of your own accord, and for what? To be a human, one of those pitiful, constrained creatures. Astarion shook his head. I guess I should not be complaining, since that only plays into my hand. Still, I can't help but feel offended. It is offensive to see the only other member of my tribe debase herself so thoroughly. He grimaced. And yet, you and your lover deem yourselves my enemies. Suddenly, Astarion let out a laugh. Make no mistake, I have no enemies. I have no rivals, either. All you are is an obstacle, at best. Sunny regarded Astarion with a dark expression. He has no enemies. Astarion did not mean that he was a friend to everyone, of course. Instead, he meant that no one, not even the 2 of them, was qualified to be his enemy. Because he was that much more fearsome than anyone else. Arrogant bastard. And what was with that whole speech about how Nephis failed to behave like a proper Dreamspawn? It sounded completely unhinged, but also strangely sincere. Well, of course it did. If Astarion did not consider them worthy of being his enemies, he would have no reason to go out of his way to lie to them about every little thing, either. He could have expressed his earnest distaste. I guess Mordred was right. Mordred had told Sunny once that Astarion did not consider himself to be a human. It had sounded like an insult back then, but now, Sunny saw that it was simply a dispassionate truth. Astarion did not think of himself as a member of the human race. However, he did not consider himself a nightmare creature, either. Rather, he believed himself to be a member of an entirely different tribe, a unique being that belonged to both worlds. A Dreamspawn, a being who was neither a human nor an abomination, but inherited some traits of both. Nephis smiled darkly. Sorry to disappoint. If it makes you feel any better, though, please know that no matter how much I disgust you, you disgust me more. She frowned then. This is the 3rd time I am asking you, Astarion. What do you want? But Sunny did not hear her. Because at that moment, something clicked in his mind, and a hint of a dreadful understanding made his eyes widen slightly. 2758 Dire ambition. When a seed of a troubling theory formed itself in Sunny's mind, he tried his hardest to suppress his shock. However, he must have let something show, because the shadows across the ivory tower suddenly grew restless. Nephis spared him a brief glance and continued her verbal duel with Astarion. Sunny, meanwhile, was too preoccupied with exploring his suspicion, wanting to turn it into certainty, and dreading that certainty as well. It can't be. Can it be? He examined the facts. All of them were things he had already known. However, only after meeting Astarion face to face did it become possible to assign real weight to these tidbits of knowledge and, therefore, draw connections between them. The first hint was the timing of Astarion's supposed return. He had mentioned having to push his plans forward because of Nef's unexpected ascension to the throne of supremacy. But what about it had made Astarion feel hurried, exactly? Maybe the answer to that question was not as important as the question itself. Astarion had mentioned planning to escape his lunar prison soon after the Chain of Nightmares, as if it held some hidden meaning. He had spent decades imprisoned on the moon. So why would he only want to escape after Antarctica fell, and not at any point before? The death of the sovereigns had apparently nothing to do with it, even if they had been responsible for ruthlessly ensuring the continued non-existence of his insidious domain. There were numerous potential answers to that question. The fact that the sovereigns had finally revealed themselves, for example. The arrival of the Skinwalker and other great ones on Earth, the dream realm beginning to devour the waking world piece by piece. The conflict between the great clans moving toward open war, thus distracting the original supremes. But what if the real reason was something else? Sunny was suddenly reminded of the conversation between him and Morgan that had happened in the Nightmare Desert soon after the disastrous Battle of the Black Skull. She had been planning to leave them and escape with the Summer Night, while Sunny had been planning to challenge the Third Nightmare as a means of escape. So, he had asked Morgan if he would face consequences for attaining transcendence without the permission of the great clans, and she told him that he did not have to worry about that. Because critical mass had already been reached, and the waking world's collapse could not be delayed anymore. So, the Chain of Nightmares was when the sovereigns had stopped artificially suppressing the number of emerging saints. That was when Astarion had begun to plan his return. Sunny remembered another conversation, as well. That one was not a conversation with Morgan, instead, it was a conversation with her sinister brother, Mordred. It happened back in Mirage City, where Mordred revealed to him how Astarion had ended up on the moon, as well as the fact that he would inevitably return and pose a grave danger to everyone. Mordred had described Astarion as what Nephis was supposed to be, but taken to a logical conclusion. A being that walked on the edge between a human and a nightmare creature. Nephis and Astarion were like two sides of the same coin, or perhaps twisted reflections of each other. Nephis had denied the nightmare creature part of herself, so much so that she became the epitome of humanity as well as its ruler. Astarion, meanwhile, embraced the creature part of himself fully, to the point that he did not even consider himself to be human. Now that Sunny had heard Astarion personally confirm Mordred's description, he was struck by a sudden revelation. In hindsight, it felt almost obvious, like most things were. And the key to that revelation was a third conversation Sunny remembered. That last conversation had nothing to do with the Valor siblings. Instead, it was a conversation with Nightwalker, who had been betrayed and abandoned by Astarion in the Eternal City. It was not about the Dreamspawn himself, though. It was about a different monster. The primordial human who had been cursed by Shadow God at the dawn of time, Connacht. Connacht had become the ruler of the first human kingdom, in the end. However, he was not satisfied with his historic throne, instead, Connacht wanted to become a god. To achieve apotheosis. No matter how much he tried, though, godhood eluded him. His kingdom slowly turned into a land of nightmares, ruined by his obsession, but eventually, Connacht did find a way to become a deity. He learned how to achieve apotheosis through consuming his kingdom, as well as all its citizens, and he would have succeeded if the Demon of Repose had not stopped him. Damn, Asian. Nightwalker had explained something else to Sunny, as well. It was the way tyrants became terrors. They became terrors by consuming the minions. So, now, here was a man named Astarion, who did not consider himself human and thought of himself as a creature instead. Creatures walk the path of ascension in a different manner from humans. Wouldn't that mean that Astarion, born to the zealots of the Path of Ascension cult, could strive to emulate that manner himself? He was not a tyrant, though, and did not control an army of minions. Instead, he was a supreme who controlled a domain. Just like Connacht had controlled the first human kingdom. So if Astarion, the descendant of the god of hunger, expanded his domain to encompass all of humanity, could he attempt to consume humanity in order to fuel his apotheosis? Sunny sensed a cold shiver run down his spine. That lunatic. Astarion might not have spent decades on the moon because he couldn't come back. Instead, he might have simply remained there, far above Earth, waiting for humanity to fatten up. And only when the number of powerful humans began to rise exponentially in the wake of the Chain of Nightmares, thus offering him a big enough feast, did he decide to come back. 2759 Just a monster. Sunny felt an echo of an old, mostly forgotten hatred. It was the hatred he had felt when the truth of the Forgotten Shore was finally revealed to him. The 7 heroes of that cursed land had performed a dreadful hecatomb to create a new sun and dispel the darkness, a bloody sacrifice to fuel their artificial god. It's always the same revolting story. The heroes of the Forgotten Shore had sacrificed countless people to create the nameless sun. Thousands of years later, that sun became the Crimson Terror and consumed every living being on the Forgotten Shore to become an even greater horror. Connacht had wanted to consume his kingdom in order to become a god. And now, Astarion wanted to devour all of humanity for the same reason. Ah, I hate it. Back when Astarion had gotten himself trapped on the moon, humanity had been incomparably weaker than it was today. There had been barely any saints around, and very few masters. The entire awakened population of the waking world could be gathered in a single dormitory tower of NQSC, granted, those human hives were quite enormous. The power of humanity had grown gradually over the decades, and then exploded in the wake of the Chain of Nightmares. By the time the Domain War happened, there were no fewer than 100 saints, thousands of masters, and more than 1 million awakened out there. These numbers continued to grow with startling speed after Nephis came to power, much faster than before the war, even, since her policy was more or less the opposite of what the original sovereigns had enforced. She did not attempt to limit or control the number of awakened and masters challenging the seeds of nightmare. Not only that, but she earnestly supported their pursuit of greater strength, encouraging as many people as possible to challenge the spell. As a result, countless people had perished in the jaws of nightmares, but the power of humanity had swelled greatly, as well. Which meant that humanity had become powerful enough to satiate Astarion's hunger. In fact, it was developing so swift that he had deemed it necessary to push forward the day of his return. That was most likely the reason why he had maimed Cassie instead of simply killing her, even if killing her would have been much simpler. Because if she died, there would be one less saint for him to use as fuel for his apotheosis. And not just any saint, at that. Despite her unassuming ways, Cassie was one of the most powerful transcendents in existence. In fact, one could argue that she was the most powerful. That wretched bastard, having deduced the answer to the mystery that had been plaguing them for a long while, their enemy's motive, Sunny felt dazed. The Dreamspawn had always been a mysterious and sinister figure, so Sunny anticipated that his goals were far from benign. However, the idea of consuming all of mankind to fuel one's apotheosis was so preposterously wicked that it gave him pause. He's a damn cannibal. The god of cannibals, really. But no, that was not an apt description. Astarion did not consider himself human, after all, so from his point of view, he would not be devouring beings of his own kind. He was not a cannibal, he was just a monster. Sunny shifted slightly, casting a somber gaze at Nephis. At that moment, he wanted nothing more than to share his sudden discovery with her, but sadly, Cassie was unconscious, so they lost the familiar means of silent communication. Is there even a point of keeping quiet, though? Sunny had already been feeling apprehensive, but at that moment, he could not help but sense a cold shiver run down his spine. Damnation, he knew that Astarion could read people's thoughts. There had to be some limit to that ability, but they did not know what that limit was. So, their minds could very well be like an open book to Astarion, even if Sunny doubted it. The Dreamspawn could definitely glean at least some of their thoughts, but overcoming the mental defenses of 2 supreme titans had to be a challenge even for him. Cursing quietly, Sunny divided his countless streams of consciousness into 2. Then, he divided the multitude of these mental partitions by 2 several more times, until keeping them isolated from each other became a strain even for his deific mind. Finally, he hid his current train of thought in only one of these thousands of partitions, making it close to impossible to find. Astarion spared him a curious glance, then turned back to Nephis. "You is Kappa Ed what I want?" He raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it obvious?" Astarion looked around the ivory tower, then cast the gaze of his golden eyes at the 2 of them and grinned. "Everything. I want everything." He spread his arms, as if wanting to embrace the world. "I want your citadels. I want your soldiers. I want your people, too. I can sense some of your true desires, as well. So, no, There will be no deal. 2,760 sold of ours. Neff studied Astarion for a few moments, then continued in an even tone. In truth, you do not really want our citadels. You do not want to rule humanity or conquer both worlds, either. All you want is to grow. All you want is to use the human domain as fertilizer for your growth. Ah, I've never felt a more abominable hunger. Astarion met her gaze with a nonchalant smile. So you knew what I wanted all along, but still went to the trouble of asking 3 times. All that just to refuse me. He sighed. This is the problem with those who were near-2G'd by the nightmare spell. Your power is exceptional, but you are too militant. You are too used to solving problems with a sharp sword, so No1 knows the value of good negotiations. Smiling faintly, he shook his head. Still, you are only reluctant to strike a deal with me because you are under the illusion that there is a different choice. Your mind will change once you taste true despair. Of course, by then, I won't be offering such reasonable terms. Sunny scoffed. I was right. You really do like the sound of your own voice. Well, no surprise. You are quite eloquent, after all. However, I could not help but notice your peculiar choice of words earlier. What was it? We'll get to live the rest of our lives in peace if we agree. He gave Astarion an unamused look. You forgot to mention that the rest of our lives would not amount to much, didn't you? A handful of years, at best. Goodness, something tells me that you are not approaching this supposed deal in good faith. He turned to Neffes. Actually, I figured out what this lunatic wants already. He is aiming for natural apotheosis. Maybe unnatural is a more fitting word in this case, though. He wants to achieve what Connacht failed to achieve and attain godhood through feeding on his own domain, not as a human but as a creature. In short, he wants to enthrall all of humanity, then devour it. Turning to Astarion, Sunny added in a dark tone. What a guy. In response, Astarion gave him an amused look. You figured me out so quickly. My, I guess you did not become supreme by accident, after all. His tone was friendly and easygoing, not at all fitting the hideous darkness of his genocidal intent. A heavy silence hung in the air, overflowing with tension. An unexpected sound then suddenly broke the silence, surprising both Sunny and Astarion. It was the sound of laughter. Neffes was laughing. Her laugh was dry and joyless, but she was laughing nonetheless. So, that's it. She looked at Astarion, her eyes full of contempt. That is all the great and terrible Astarion amounts to. All these years of waiting, the ominous mystery surrounding you, the fear of you everyone seems to share, and in the end, you are no different from the other two. His smile dimmed a little. Ouch, that was uncalled for. Neffes, meanwhile, gritted her teeth. All of this because you're just another cowardly deserter who is afraid to challenge the 5th nightmare. Her eyes blazed with white flames. Anvil and Kisong convinced themselves that they could not abandon the waking world or risk leaving humanity without the guardianship of Supremes. But you don't care about the waking world or humanity. So, what is your excuse? Astarion met her fiery gaze with a relaxed smile. Why do I need an excuse? He looked at her, then shifted his gaze to Sunny in confusion. And why do I need to gamble my life away in the 5th nightmare when there is a safer, better way to become a deity? Sunny exhaled slowly. Why? Oh, I'm not sure. Has it ever occurred to you that consuming the souls of countless humans, of all humans, is the vilest, most appalling way of attaining godhood one can imagine, perhaps? Astarion raised an eyebrow. Really? Remind me, please, how is it that you two became Supreme Titans? Was it through pacifism and natural enlightenment, maybe? Or was it through murder, slaughter, and bloodshed? He shook his head. How many souls have the two of you consumed to get to where you are? Sunny scowled deeply. Too many, perhaps. However, are you really comparing the souls of nightmare creatures to those of humans? Astarion laughed. Oh, and you two have never killed humans? The piles of corpses left in Godgrave tend to disagree. And even then, is there really such a difference? You treat nightmare creature as if they do not count. But they are living creatures, too. Most of them are beasts, but many are just as sentient as you and I. It's just that their sentience differs from your own, so you don't feel the need to extend them the courtesy of counting them as individuals. Sunny stared at the dreamspawn, feeling dizzy. He really could not tell if Astarion was simply a pathological liar or actually insane. Perhaps it was both. The dreamspawn was not mentally ill, but his worldview was so outside the norm that he could not be considered a sane person, either. At the same time, he lied as easily as he breathed. However, His lies were always masterfully hidden between truths, cunning omissions, and baseless assumptions presented as facts, which made conversing with him a horrible headache. Astarion's deceit was so believable and spoken so confidently that even Sunny found himself involuntarily accepting it as truth sometimes. The worst part was that the bastard was not even seriously trying to deceive them, considering that all his lies crumbled easily as long as one examined them just a little. Take this last claim, for Ample. On the surface, it sounded like a bold, but oddly logical accusation. Of course, Astarion had failed to mention that all nightmare creatures shared an overwhelming compulsion to kill and devour humans. If there were peaceful abominations out there, Sunny and Nephis would have never attacked them of their own accord. There is indeed a difference. They are the aggressors, we are merely defending ourselves out of necessity. We are simply trying to survive. Astarion gave him a pitying look. Isn't that what I am doing, as well? Do you think humans were never the aggressors from whom I had to defend myself? To me, you humans are no different from nightmare creatures, strangers who stand in the way of my survival. Do not forget that I was born here, in the dream realm. This is my home. You, on the other hand, are the invaders. Sunny smiled darkly. I think you're lying through your teeth. Nephis stared at Astarion with scathing intensity. Her voice, however, remained even. There is a huge flaw in your reasoning, though. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, is there? She nodded. It is quite misguided of you to assume that conquering the human domain, which Sunny and I rule, will be safer and more conducive to your survival than challenging the fifth nightmare. Astarion remained silent for a while, looking at her with a strange smile. Then, he sighed. I guess you don't know. It makes sense, considering that the elders of your clan passed away a long time ago, while Anvil and Kisong regarded you as a threat. The chain of inheritance was broken, and plenty of knowledge seems to have been lost. Astarion shook his head. The fifth nightmare, it's different from all the rest. Challenging it is a far greater gamble than challenging the previous four. Chances of conquering it are slim. He fell silent for a moment, and then added somberly. And even if you succeed, you won't be the same.